Oh no, backend is unhealthy. Well, I've never seen Twitch give us the response of backend is unhealthy before. That is new. Well, maybe I won't be streaming today. Um, I don't think that I'm streaming, and I don't think that it's gonna let me stream. I think that it is busted. Yeah, okay, so that's that. We will advertise this on YouTube. I was going to complain about YouTube, and turns out I should be complaining about Twitch. YouTube's continuous notifications that they want me to be someone else, not great. Alright, so it looks like there is no streaming capability. It looks like it's broken. If you can hear me... Oh, you can hear. Okay, so I don't know what's going on. It now says that I'm live, but I can't see my dashboard. So I don't know whether I'm live or not. I think I am, but who can tell? I guess I'll tell the world about it, but that's very strange. I might be streaming Indie Dev, but Twitch... for some reason, Twitch is not... There it is. But Twitch is telling me their backend is unhealthy, and I can't tell if I'm actually online. There we go. All right. So I'm tired, but I'm going to try and do some work here. I'm not sure what there is to do. I mean, I know there's tons of stuff to do, but I don't know where I really left off. I think we'd finished with some visualization, so let's hit play and see where we stand. I just updated the version of Unity, and I think it's an important thing to test and see whether or not there are any significant errors. We still have that one frame flicker, which I'll solve some other day. I really don't like that one frame flicker, though. That really bothers me a lot. Well, either way, what we have here is a very basic setup. You know what? The one frame flicker would go away if I reversed the position of the bar. If it was pointing from here to the pilot ship, that would be a lot more useful to us, I think, right? Well, I'll do it later, some other day. For right now, the tasks are being completed, but currently there is no sort of idea of the health, the overall health of the ship. There's really a couple of things that I want to display. I need to have a sense of how healthy the crew members are, measured in their fatigue. But I also need to know how healthy the ship is, as measured by the number of tasks that have gone on for too long. For now, let's go ahead and start with the crew members, because they already exist. Might as well make something out of that. So we're just going to duplicate the same task UI list. And the reason that I'm just going to duplicate it is because I can just move it off to the side. So this is its own canvas. We're going to call this the character or a crew UI list. We're not going to want to have some of these task-specific values. And this panel is going to also be... Oh, it doesn't have any task-specific values, so that's great. And then what we can do is inside this, we can start to add in panels which are ideal for our crew display. And we're on the wrong side, so let's go ahead and flip this panel over to the left side. Like so. So this is going to be a crew UI element. That's not crew UI, that's crew IO. There we are. And the crew UI is going to be a text box describing them, and it's also going to be a render texture or some kind of it'd have to be a render texture, and a render texture showing who they are, which will be just blank right now. We don't have a set up render texture for this yet, and we'll just put it off in the corner like so, and maybe we'll give it a specific size after all. Excuse me. I'm gonna sneeze directly into mic. Anyway, once again, I can't tell whether or not Twitch is actually streaming. It's throwing up all sorts of weird errors at me. But for now, I'll just keep assuming that I'm streaming. We're gonna make this maybe 32 by 32. That's too small. 40 by 40. And we'll offset it a little bit so it doesn't have quite that kind of error. And then we'll move this so that it's in the right spot, like so. And give it a 40, 50. Yeah, there we are, 50. With a position of 5, -5. We're going to want to use a best fit for this, I think. And obviously the height is too high. And we will go ahead and put a temporary name in here, like crew member A. And then what we're going to want to do is put in the values that we need to put in for how healthy the crew member is. And right now, I think the only value is the fatigue level. That's not how you spell it. Wow, I am really tired. I need to stop being quite so tired. Anyway, the fatigue is going to be just the same exact setup, except that we're going to be from the bottom rather than the top. And we are going to be oriented on the right rather than the left. And rather than a best fit, we're just going to go with size 14. And we're going to call this 10 fatigue. Now, there are a lot of things we are going to need to do to make this work. One of the things we're going to want to do is add in our very own UI binder. Boop. Perfect. Now, the UI binder will be able to automatically give the crew the specifics of what they need to do, or show what the crew is up with. It automatically displays the values based on the names of the text boxes and so on. But first, we need to track down where the heck the crew are. They're here. No? Oh, they're not. Of course, they're not in the bridge. They're in the dorm. There we are. So there's a whole bunch. And we'll just drop this Alice character into the target here. And we'll refresh every frame. And we're going to want to open up the crew member object, because there are in fact a couple of things I want to have as strings that we don't really have yet. So we got public float exhaustion equals 0. We're going to do public string fatigue, or exhaustion description, and we'll go ahead and do this as a get, and then we'll return mathf.floor exhaustion plus fatigue. Easy as pie. We're also going to want to do a task description, so public string task description. Yeah, we don't already have one. Get, and we'll just say if no task, return off duty. Otherwise, return task.name. So that should do. All we now have to do is add, this needs to be exhaustion description, right? Yeah, exhaustion description. And we'll do another duplicate here, make it left binding. And we're going to call this, just duty. And we're going to call this one task description, right? Or was it duty description? I think it was task. Yeah. And then we can hit save. And when we hit play, we should see everything but the face, because the face isn't isn't something that exists. I don't have any visuals for the characters in here yet. But you can see how she's now optimizing the solar port. If we continue on, we can see that now she's optimizing solar on the other side. And then she's off duty for a while. And then she's optimizing the solar again. And you can see how that's going to work. This is obviously a very basic and primitive setup, but it's not too bad. We're going to want to change the background so that it's a little bit less awful in terms of difficulty to see. We're going to go ahead and just make it kind of a slightly light gray. Let's see. I've got I should really edit my panels. I might as well do that now. And you can get what's it called? The trash game. Let's grab that on my itch.io page. Why is nothing filling in automatically these days? Okay, what's going on here? All right, itch.io. Debris fishing, that's what it's called. Alright, so I'm just going to do this on camera since I'm actually not even sure if we're streaming. You can get debris fishing here. Paste. And then I'll just turn editing back off. Oh, it didn't turn into a link. Okay, so I've got to put... It's a very specific format. Bracket. Very exciting stuff. Sorry that I am sort of doing something like this on camera. It's not even on camera. It's on a screen you can't see, which makes it doubly pointless. There we are. All right, so now that we are done with that, and I've lost my viewer, let's go ahead and continue on here. We've got our crew member working. We don't have a visual for the face, but we do have the duty and the fatigue set up correctly. If we take a look here, I want to make sure that that fatigue is actually representative. It should begin to go up as they do tasks. Come on. There we are. Yeah, it does. Good. So with that in mind, we have to have some way to sort of tell what's going on. And one of the ways we can do that is we can have the task be tracked by the crew member as well. So right now, when the task pops up on the right, it does this little laser beam which fires out to the destination. And like you can see here, if it's on the pilot ship on the bridge, then there's a laser to the bridge, and so on and so forth. This is something I can do the exact same thing if I want. I can use the exact same setup and fire a laser off towards the bridge. So we're going to go ahead and try that out and see whether it looks decent. First things first, we're going to want the task UI list sort order to be 5 and the crew UI list sort order to be 3. With that said, we're going to need to create a laser beam. So we'll just grab ourselves an image like so, and then we'll move it around until it is laser beam shaped. Like so. And then we will just bring it down to being 1 by 1. I think 1 by 10 is probably best, right? 1 by 5 maybe. And then what will happen is we'll scale it on the y-axis and rotate it. And that'll be how we point to where we're trying to get to. And the way we're going to do this, we're going to call this pointer. And we're just going to drop in the script that we already made specifically for that purpose, which is the UI line to 3D script. The problem is that this takes a target 3D, and we don't have a target 3D that we can rely on. So what we're going to need to do is have this target 3D get filled whenever the user changes their current task. So for that, we're going to need some kind of user position or something similar. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add that into the crew member setup here. We're going to have a public transform location, and that's going to be either our the place we live, or it will be the place we're working. So get, oh, I've got the wrong window open here. I can't see what's going on. So get, if not task, then return, I guess we'll just return ourselves for now. Otherwise, return task.transform like this. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to have a Unity event which passes a transform. Chances are in the long run we'll put it in its own file or whatever, but for now we can just take advantage of how easy it is to use IDEs and stick it wherever the heck we please, and we'll always be able to find it just by right-clicking, so it's all good. Public class transform event descends from Unity event transform and has no special features. It's also going to be serializable. There we go. And then down here what we'll do is we will have a public transform event, or position changed or location changed. No, it's not. Sorry, it's a transform event. Location changed. Like so. And what we'll do is we'll just call that whenever we are changing our position. So one of the things we'll do is we'll call it on start. So protected void start on transform, or transform. Yeah, it should be on, shouldn't it? On location changed. Yeah. On location changed dot invoke transform position location. That one. And once again, we'll put it in the task here. This. But we're also going to want to put it into the task started. And you might notice that we don't have a task started function. Well, we can do that in a couple of ways, but I think the easiest way to do it is to turn this into a getter and a setter. Task equals value and on location change dot invoke location. Now we have some stuff down here where we do task completed and all this stuff, right? And we invoke on location changed right down here in task completed. We're going to delete that because we don't need it anymore. It'll happen when we set task equal to null. So this is not really ideal. There's a lot of other ways to do it. We'll have to think about whether or not this is the best approach. But this will work. And then what we do is we save this. But we need the UI line to 3D to actually sign up for that event on the character, on the crew member. And in order to do that, we're going to need a special script. There's just nothing around it. We're going to need some kind of script. We've already got all of our script standards. No, don't show it in Explorer. Just create a new one. We've already got all of our script standards set up, and we'll just do it the same way. It's called crew UI or crew member UI, since we're calling it crew member. The reason I'm calling it crew member instead of crew is just because that way I don't have to try and remember whether crew is singular or plural. So the crew member UI is just going to take a crew member. Oh, I've got to put it in crew here. Name space crew. Public crew member target. And then we're going to want to actually have this be something. So we're going to go ahead and make this, again, just a getter and a setter. Get, return target, set, target equals value. But we're also going to want to sign up for the target. So target dot on location changed plus equals, and then we need to point it at the thing that we are trying to control, which is the UI line to 3D. So in order to do that, we're going to need the UI line to 3D. Public UI line to 3D pointer. And then here what we'll do is we'll just say plus equals pointer dot, and then we're going to want to have the UI line to 3D have a function that actually can allow us to set that value. So if we look here, we can set the transform and that sort of thing, but there's no dedicated function for it, which means we can't call it very easily without creating actions and stuff. Don't really feel like creating actions, so we'll just create a public void set target transform target, and we'll just say target 3D equals target. That's all we need to do. And that's just, I hate having to create boilerplate after boilerplate, but there's really nothing I can do about it. This is not something I've figured out how to make happen more automatically. So what you can see here is it's underlined in red, and that's because you can't use plus equal. You have to use add listener. I'm still used to C# events, which use plus equal. I don't know why Unity events haven't co-opted that. But this is not all we need to do. We need to actually say if target, then you need to remove the listener. There's no remove listener. Yeah, there's a remove listener, it's just capitalized. And then here we say it again, if target, because we can't be assigning a listener to null. That wouldn't work very well. So in this case, what we've got is we've got it set up correctly, but what we're going to want to do down here is in start, we're going to want to just trigger that. This is a very, very primitive way to set up the events. Now the problem with this is that start happens whenever it happens to occur, whereas with the crew member, we also have something happening in start. See? So it may be that this might happen before or after. So in order to make sure that we catch that crew member if we're starting up at just the right time, well, you know what? It should be fine. I'm thinking about it, and these should never be, well, they might be. Well, either way, what we need to do is set up the UI line to 3D pointer to point at the target for now. So if target, then set it equal to itself and also set up ourselves like so. That way it doesn't matter who goes first, it will work either way. So this is a very basic setup, and the reason we're going into having a custom crew member UI is because we're going to eventually start to have things that are too complicated for the UI binder to really do. Like we're probably going to need to start doing things like changing the icon based on the character's personality and what they're feeling about whatever they're saying, and that's going to be something that we're going to have something a little more complicated than a UI binder. Either way, that should work fine. We'll just drop the crew member UI here. And what we're going to want to do is eventually we're going to want this to actually set up all of the others. So for now, we'll set it like this. I also want to make sure that we have an understanding here. So here in target, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to also set up all of the other pieces of this puzzle. So UI binder B equals get component UI binder. And then we say b.target equals target. And we can also set up this. We don't need to put it in here. We can just put it in here. Perfect. That should work fine. We don't need any other problems. And we'll just go ahead and see whether this works. It does not work. So it's clearly trying to target something. This pointer seems to be exactly the opposite of what it should be, which is kind of weird. You can see how that's actually where she is. She's right there. So it's just 180 degrees off, but I'm not sure why it's 180 degrees off. I do understand that these guys are moving in the opposite. Oh, of course. It's 180 degrees off because it's scaling off of the wrong edge. There we are, much better. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the color here so that it's not quite as opaque. There's no reason for it to be that kind of super opaque. We'll give it this kind of neutral bluish gray. We're going to move it up so that it's behind the panel rather than in front. It's actually still in front of the panel because of how the panel is constructed. We can fix that later if we need to. For now, I think that's fine. And now what we're going to want to do is just create a crew UI for each of the members just to test out how it looks and feels. We will go ahead and be a little bit better about it and automatically create them after we do a little bit of testing. We're also going to change the names of the crew UI element. So here we're going to go ahead and say if target, then we're going to change our name to match the target. So name equals target.name plus UI. And then otherwise, name equals unused crew member UI. All right, and that should help us to keep it clear in profile in this view here. Alice, Bob, and George. Boom. There we are. Nice, good. The camera angle leaves much to be desired, but the basic idea seems pretty solid. There are a lot of things I can do to spice this up and make it work better visually, but for now I think I'm okay with leaving it like this kind of super basic setup where you get a feeling of what's going on like this. But I'm not sure that I like it coming up from the bottom of the screen. I sort of think it should be at the other edge, but that might just be because of the camera angle I'm using. With this camera angle, the ship moves from top right to bottom left, which means that it would make the most sense to fill here and here. But if I can change the camera however I want, then I guess it'll always be diagonal corners, but it might be the other two diagonal corners. For now, let's go ahead and change it. It's not the sort of thing that is difficult to change back. Yeah, I sort of think that those lines are still a little bit thick. Let's go ahead and thin them out just a touch. And here, thin them out just a touch. That's a little bit more like it. Let's post a screenshot to Twitter since I actually have no idea whether or not this is streaming. Twitch is still telling me that the back end is unhealthy. I can't help you with your unhealthy back end. Maybe you should do some leg presses. Har har, very funny. So, oh, I don't have Twitter open anymore because I closed it. Setting up more UI stuff. Game div. So now what I'd like to do is change some of the parameters so that we get a different kind of response. AC Wraith says that it's streaming, and Neo Dragoon says, I think that's a picture of Billy Mays laughing. So I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Right, so let's go ahead and change some of these values. For example, right now we've got everything taking just one crew member. What I'm going to do is, now that we can see which crew members are for which things, we're going to go over to the bridge. I think that this is the bridge room rather than the bridge chamber. There it is. And we're going to make this pilot ship take 2 workers instead of just 1. And now you can see they're both working on piloting the ship. Perfect. I think that's great. This is already working pretty much like I have intended it to work. There are a lot of things here. The problem here is that we have a lot of moving pieces, and telling the player what's going on is going to be a little bit difficult. Now, it's not going to be as hard as you might think because the player will have built the ship. So they'll understand a lot of the parts that they created. So when we talk about the fact that, when we talk about the fact that we are going to be going through Zoom. So when we talk about the fact that when you are going to work on the engine back here, the crew is going to be moving from this room through the hallway, through this room, and then into the engine bay. And we already have that mapped out. We already understand that that's the path. And the thing is that this room here is a room that the player, in this case me, put in knowing what it would do. This is a mess hall. The mess hall adds to the amount of time a task takes, but reduces the actual fatigue cost of the task. At least that's the theory. So with that in mind, how do we report that that is what's happening without being too loud, but also without being too quiet? The player already knows that it's there, and that's the intention, but we have to sort of tell the player that it's working as intended. There are a couple of options. One is that we can just have a running like lines of text down here. Alice passed through the crew. Alice passed through the chamber. Alice passed through. Bob passed through it. George passed through it. But that doesn't really give you a good sense of where on the ship this sort of thing is unfolding. So what I really want to do is have a pop-up that is specific for the room in question. And right now, we're doing this sort of lasers pointed at the various places on the screen, and I think we might want to just continue that. So if I put like a bunch of small pop-ups where the rooms talk about what they're doing up here, I can have them point to the rooms with their laser beams, and in theory that would be pretty understandable. But in order to do that, what we've got to do is we've got to make a room.say function. So if we take a look in here, the functional room might already have a say function. It does not. Okay, so we're going to have to add in a say function for the functional room. Let's go ahead and add in some code regions. There we go. Public void say. We're going to put that above the region. String comment, and then we're going to go ahead and give it a priority. Or let's go ahead and make it a type. So public enum message type. We'll go ahead and say normal, low priority, high priority, emergency. I think we need to be a little bit more than this, though. So call it normal, low priority, warning, alert, or alarm. And then we'll also have loud. And the reason that I want them to be different is because I'm going to use good and bad messages, and I want to be sure that I encode that into the message type. Message type equals message type dot normal. So we're just going to start off by saying these things to the debug log. Go away. I can't see anything. There we go. So that should work. Room.name is meaningless. It's just name. And so that will allow the room to say things when things happen. Right now, none of the rooms actually have much to say. They do have a whole bunch of functionality, but that functionality is on the back end. It's invisible. And if I were to pop up messages every time we did a pathfinding check through the room, we'd get a lot of messages. But the thing is that these functional rooms don't actually have any function right now. The reason that they're called functional rooms is because they blockade sectors, because you have to pass through functional rooms in order to get places. But we don't actually have any functions to make those functional rooms do their stuff. We're going to be descending from functional rooms to create specific kinds of functional rooms, including, this kind of social room that we're creating now. But in order to do that, we need to have a generic top-level function call that gets called at the right times. So public virtual void, and we're going to need to figure out when to call those things. Now, the most obvious time to call them is when the task completes. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and say task completed, and then we're going to pass it a task. Now, this is a little bit complex because the basic idea here is that we need to go through all the characters and hit them with our function. Crew members that were involved and hit them with our function. And that means that we've got to go through the task, find everyone that was involved, and hit them. So for each crew member m in task.workers, task completed m. And then we'll just create another one, public virtual void task completed, crew member target. And we'll also, should we pass it the task as well? There might be times when we want both. Say no function for name. On target.name. There we are. So this should be a good test to see whether or not it works, but right now we're not calling it. So we need to go over to the tasks and tell the tasks that when they start to get completed, they are going to call any functional room along their path and tell it that it's completed. Now, if we take a look at this setup down here, we do not have a list of functional rooms. We have a list of path elements. And that means we have to go through each of the path elements and find if there's a functional room attached to it. The good news is that the path element and the functional room are on the same object. If we take a look, they're not descended from each other. They're different classes, but they're on the same game object, which means it's not going to be expensive to hunt through them. It's not as nice as caching them, but we're not really going to be burning a lot of CPU on this, so it should be okay. So here, when we complete, what we're going to do is we are going to go through all of these crew members, and we're going to go through and find all of the functional rooms and then pass them all of our crew members. So for each path element PE in path, we say functional room R equals PE.get component functional room. If R, then R dot complete, what was it called? Task completed this. Very basic setup, right? And that should be all we need to do to get this to work, in theory. So let's shrink this down and let it reload. There we are. Clear this out, hit play. Let this finish off here. Oh, it takes quite a while. These 5-hour ones are slow. I should change that back to only requiring one crew member. All right, so now, boom. All right, so let's pause it. And if we take a look down here in the log, you can see how we've got a whole bunch of completing task lists. And here we say, small bridge room, no function on Bob. And so that's the exact sort of thing we're talking about here. The only problem I see is that, I guess there was, small dorm integrated, small mess hall. Yeah, so this is working fine. There are a lot of problems with it in terms of not actually doing anything, but as it is, it works fine. We're going to delete the functional room garbage line. We don't need that anymore. And we'll just ascend from this. Override this for specific per crew member functionality. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and create a... there was something else we needed to do. Right now, the path element doesn't have a length involved. If we go into the path element and we take a look and we see what's going on here, this here, it grabs various components and it tries to find a good path through everything. And the way it does that is it just adds 0.1, which you can see here. We're going to want that to be a value we can set. So we're just going to go ahead and create a variable for that. No, we're going to want to put it after the static. Here we are. Public float hours to traverse. Okay, so hold on, that's not right. Pathfinding isn't the same as hours of time spent. So functional rooms are going to have... I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. It is going to be a path element. We are going to have an amount of time these take, so it has to be here. Hours to traverse equals 0. It doesn't matter how far you have to walk if it's down just corridors, who cares? And what we'll do is we will add the hours to traverse to the task's length. If we take a look at the task and we come up to the top here, we've already set aside some values. We've got a base task length, and then we've got additional tasks, additional values here. So what we're going to do is when we begin our search for what we're going to try to determine, we're going to want to, I think we don't need this anymore. What we're going to want to do is here in the path length, when we go out and we try and find the pathing, we're going to want the path to include all of the elements. When we get the path, we have all of the elements that make up the path length. So when it comes to actually setting up the path, when the path is done being grabbed, we need to go through all the path elements and add them to our task length. I just don't know where that is. Here it is. This is where we add the final element, which is ourselves. So then what we do is we're going to go ahead and clear out the modified task length. And for each path element, p in path dot path modified task length plus equals p dot traverse time, hours to traverse. Unfortunately, hours to traverse is a float, whereas modified path time is an int. So we're going to want to make this into a float as well. And then in here, we'll just seal it. There we go. So path.path is not something that exists. What is it? Path dot... it should be a path object, right? Oh, path is actually a list of path elements. So that's what we need. Great, perfect. So that should work. The only thing we have to do now is make it so the path element cares about how large that is. So when we find this length here, we're going to want to actually add in the length of, here it is, the length of our hours to traverse. Because you're going to want to try and find the shortest length, and there are times when that's going to be a major factor. So down here, we're going to go ahead and add in our hours to traverse as well as 0.1. As long as our hours to traverse aren't negative, that'll work fine. So over here in hours to traverse, we'll add in a tooltip. Do not make negative. All right, so then what we can do is we can shrink this down, and we can change the pilot ship to only take one crew member. And then what we can do is we can edit our beautiful new room, which is this guy, the mess hall. And we can make this path element take an hour. There we go. And then the functional room here, we're going to want to replace that with a descendant of functional room, which doesn't yet exist. But that's not something we're going to have a hard time with. So let's create a new directory. We're going to drop the functional room script in there, which will error it out of here, which is fine. And then we're going to create a relaxation room, social room. Open that up. Come on. Open this up as well. So this is going to be namespace crew again. We're just going to grab that. Social room, why is it in the middle? Tab that in and put in a bracket, and we're going to be descending from functional room. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of social rooms, and they have different specific effects, and I haven't really decided how to represent that yet, but it's no big deal. We can just play fast and loose until we decide. So public, float, exhaustion, repair, energy gain. So this is our energy boost. This is how much energy the character recovers, or how much fatigue they lose. And it's going to be the main reason that you use these. They really help you to control your character's exhaustion levels. So we're going to override that public, thanks for your help, void, nothing. You're not going to tooltip or anything. What a wonderful IDE. Task completed. All right, so with this in mind, what we can do is we can now just make the crew member a little bit less tired. Target dot exhaustion minus equals energy boost. And then we can say what we want to say, which would be target dot name plus regains plus energy boost plus energy. We might have to worry about that becoming negative at a later date. Not too worried about that right now, though. We can always make it into a getter and a setter and do a zero, flooring. That's not something we want to do here. So that should work. Let's go ahead and try it out. So over here in our mess hall, this is the old one. We're going to drop the new one in like this. And the energy boost down here is currently set to 1. We're going to just remove this guy. And in theory, this part should work when we hit play. Yes, good. So now, when any of these start to finish, you can see how they're longer than they were. They're 6 hours rather than 5. Boom, pause. And if we take a look down here, it should say Alice regains 1 energy. And if we take a look at Alice, there we are. Her exhaustion is 1.9. What's the 0.9 is because you gain 0.1 every every round or every hour that passes. So she got 0.1 back. But if we take a look at the task that she was doing, which was the port task. This guy, you can see how it's supposed to cause 3 exhaustion, and she only got 2. So it worked great. We now have it working, but they don't currently say anything. You can see it in the debug log, but you can't see it on the screen. So we're going to need to have some kind of pop-up for rooms. And to be honest, we're probably going to want to have it be, well, it's hard for us to specify because it's like, do we want to make it so that each room has its own pop-up prefab? Because that seems a little bit aggressive. I think that we're going to want just a generic transform statement. And so we'll go ahead and create that. It's just going to be this crew UI list. We can duplicate it. Kaboom. And what we'll do is we will move the, we'll rename it to generic callouts. And we're going to go ahead and put this panel on the right side instead of the left side. Like so. And obviously we're not going to need to have the crew UI elements. But first things first, I think we're probably going to want to save this crew UI as a prefab before we forget. And we'll have to go back and make it so those auto-generate at a later date. The generic callouts, we're going to replace this crew UI with a callout UI. The callout UI is pretty much the same, except that it's going to be a generic statement. So there's not going to be a portrait, and the name is going to be, just grab it, move it, like so. And then what we're going to want to do is put in some text dialog options. Delete this guy. And we're going to call this dialog. And we will just spread it, but it needs to be a little bit bigger. So we're going to make it a little bigger. Make this dialog a little taller. Yeah, good. It's large enough. Hey, I've got something to say. There we are. We're going to move this just a touch so that it's not quite as far to the side, so that it feels like it's a little indented. There we go. And this is going to be room. So this callout UI is largely the same as we've been doing, but there's no crew member UI. Instead, what we're going to want is a callout UI element. And we don't currently have a callout or a callout UI. So really what the callout UI is it takes in a transform and it takes in a piece of dialogue that it wants to say. And it uses those to determine what's going on. So we don't need any complicated setups, but we do need to create that. So we're going to go ahead and call this a, and then it needs to destroy itself. So we're going to call it a pop-up text box. There we are. So this pop-up text box is going to be responsible for a couple of things. So to make this work, we're going to have a public void setup, transform source, string dialog, and message priority. We're going to want to using crew, or we could put the message priority here. Oh, come on. Where is it? It's over in the room. Message type. Either way, it shouldn't be in this namespace. It should be in the base namespace. So what we're going to want to do here, that's not how you spell message type. So what we're going to want to do here is grab the UI binder. And we'll say b.target equals source. Can I do a require component type of UI binder? We could also descend from UI binder, but that seems like it might be just putting too many of our eggs in one basket. Now the problem is that transform is not considered a mono behavior. So in order for us to have this be correctly bound, we have to decide what we're going to be trying to bind. And unfortunately for us, there's nothing guaranteed to be on the target object that is a mono behavior. So maybe we can't use the UI binder. I don't think we can. Okay, so there's not going to be a UI binder. No biggie. We'll just do it manually. Public transform target. We'll go ahead and say target equals source. We'll say get component in children UI line to 3D, and then we will just set that target 3D, set target to target. But we're going to need to keep track of a couple of things. So text name text, dialog text, and lastly, it's going to have to be public and public image background. So with that in mind, what we're going to want to do is say name text.text equals source.name, dialog text.dialog equals dialog. And then the background will have to get set based on the message type. So switch type. Case message type dot alarm background dot color equals color dot red break. And then we think we have like 2 or 3 of them. I guess we got 4. So we've got alarms, and we got loud, which we'll just make I guess it should be blue. And then we're going to have low priority, where it should be gray. And we're probably going to replace these with custom colors later on. For now, it's fine. And warning, which will be yellow. So with that in mind, this should now work, but we're not calling it. There's nothing around to actually perform this pop-up text box. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go over to the universe and add in the universe a capability to create a pop-up text box. So with that in mind, we'll go find the universe. Is it on the main camera? Yeah. Public transform pop-up text, or pop-up message container, and then public pop-up text box pop-up message prefab. And then we're going to have a public void say transform source and string text and message type. And then we'll just go ahead and add it in. So we'll say pop-up text box p equals pop-up text box dot instantiate pop-up message prefab container. Nope, just pop-up message prefab. Put it in the pop-up message container. And then what we're going to want to do is do p.setup with the source, and then the dialog, and then the type. There we go. So that should work fine. That's really all we need to do. All we have to do now is to set all of those wires up. There's one thing missing, and you may have noticed it if you are on the ball today. They never go away. So we're going to end up with an infinite list of them, and we'll have to deal with that. But for now, it should be okay. We're just going to go ahead and save this as a prefab, and we'll add in that function after the fact. So with the universe, we're going to need to set up the generic panel as the prefab container, and then the callout UI as the pop-up message prefab, like so. And the last thing we need to do is tell the room to say in that way. So here what we do is when we're here in say, we're going to go ahead and comment this out and instead do universe.say, and then it'll be comment, or this transform, comment, and type. Oh, universe.active.say. Is it not active? Universe. There is no static universe. That's okay. Public static universe active. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to transform this. So it's going to be public static void say, and then this crap. And then it'll be active.say source text type. That way we can call it without continually typing active, 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 active. There we go. So this should now pop things up whenever the room wants to say something. So we'll let that recompile, and then we'll hit play, and we'll hopefully we'll see it work. Well, it says, hey, I've got something to say. And the reason for that is because we forgot to set it up properly. The callout UI needs to have the name in the dialog put in the correct spots in order for us to actually have anything happen correctly. So there we go. One more time. All right, so that's good, except for the fact that the laser is on the wrong side of the pop-up, which is something I can fix. So let's go ahead and just fix that real quick. The only thing I have to do is switch it to the left side and give it a position of 5 instead of -5. And now what we're going to want to do is have those messages go away after a specific amount of time passes. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to do a public float time remaining, and we'll make that 0 to start with. And then here in setup, we're going to go ahead and make that something which is settable. So public static float delay text delay equals 1. And that'll be a value we can set in the settings menu. So from the time remaining, we're going to go ahead and add in the text delay plus, and then the text delay times the dialog.length divided by 10. That might be a little bit slow, but it doesn't matter. We can adjust it later. And what we'll do here in update, public void update. Doesn't need to be public, but just have it. Time remaining minus equals time but delta time. If time remaining is less than or equal to 0, then destroy game object. And that should be all we need to do to make it go away after a while. Come on. There we are. So you can see that Alice regains 1 energy, and then it goes away. So the only problem with this approach is that I've got these rooms named things like S Mess Hall, which is not really what we want to have it named as, but that's okay. We can change the names later. It's no biggie. That doesn't seem so bad. That seems pretty decent, actually. If anything, I can shrink it. So let's just drop the callout UI back into the panel, and we'll make it a little bit shorter this time. There are ways to make this so that it is always the right size regardless of the amount of text involved. But you know what? I am not going to do that because it just requires me to do nested layout fixes, and that's actually a little bit challenging. So no. There we are. Gonna go ahead and save that and then delete it. And I'm almost done for the day. If you have any questions, now is the time. Otherwise, we are going to take a little screenshot or two and then call it done for the day. And then on Saturday, we'll come back and we'll do more work. At some point, I'll actually stick the 3D models of people in here. Won't that be nice? Oh, too late. And added more UI. Hooray. Things are pretty functional. All right, so I'll see you folks on Saturday if you care to watch me on a weekend. I know that none of you do. M. Crowley says, how did you make it so you don't have to call active? Is your universe a singleton? Okay, so when you're doing game dev, trying to balance how to find things is always a big question because there's lots of state in the game. So what I've done with universe is a very standard approach. Oop, I closed it, so that wasn't the best thing to do. I guess I'll just reopen it by clicking on it over here. There we are. So what I've got here is I've got a static variable named active, and it's of the same class. So what I can do is when this awakes in the scene, I tell the class, the fundamental class universe, that there is an active instance, and that's me. And once I've done that, then anybody can ask the class for the active instance. And so what I did with say is I have on the active instance, I have a function named underscore say. And then on the class, I have a function named say without an underscore. And all it does is call say on the one that's active, on the instance. Neo Dragoon says, how did you get into game dev? So I got into game dev when I was 6, and I'm no good at it. But I've been no good at it for so long that I guess I'm not too bad at it anymore. So most people, I think it's really quite new for someone to get into game dev as something they do in like high school or college. I think for the most part, people either started doing games when they were really, really young, or they got into games after they graduated from college as kind of just a hobby that took off. And I think that's pretty standard these days. M. Crowley says, why didn't I think of that? Well, there's a lot of ways to do this exact same set of staticifying. And this is just the one that I tend to use because it's fairly straightforward and it's simple enough that you're not going to misunderstand it if you come back to it 5 years from now. You're not going to be like, what does active.say mean? It's pretty obvious. But there are lots of ways to do this. You can use things like static events. I use static events quite a bit. I've got one right here, in fact. And when you have a static event, you don't have to know whether there is an active instance or not. You can just sign up for the static event, and then the active instance can fire it. But that, I think, is a topic for another day. Thanks for stopping by, everybody, and hopefully I'll see you either on Saturday or next Wednesday.